Why is Israel still God's chosen people? What is the unchanging promise of the Bible amidst the escalating conflict with Iran? These are not academic questions for me. Not anymore. They are the questions that haunt the pre-dawn silence of Jerusalem, the questions that ride on the wail of a distant siren test, the questions reflected in the dark screen of my phone as it vibrates with another news alert from the north. The red notifications stack up, a digital heartbeat of anxiety. Tehran issues new warning. Iron Dome batteries redeployed. Global powers urge restraint. Restraint feels like a fragile thread in a world of steel. From my study overlooking the Kidron Valley, where shadows still cling to ancient olive groves, I can see the first light of dawn kiss the golden dome on the Temple Mount. For 30 years I have been a historian, a man of artifacts and carbon dating, of pottery shards and crumbling scrolls. My life's work has been to sift through the layers of this land, to separate myth from verifiable fact, to explain the past through the sober lens of geopolitics, economics, and human ambition. I have always treated the foundational stories of my people with a certain professional distance. The patriarchs, the Exodus, the covenants. They were powerful national epics, cultural cornerstones, the sociological glue that held a wandering people together. But a literal binding promise from the creator of the universe, that was the language of the synagogue, not the university. But last night, something shifted. The tension in the city was palpable, a low hum of collective dread. Unable to work, I walked through the quiet streets of the old city, my footsteps echoing in the narrow stone alleyways. I found myself drawn, as if by an invisible current, to the western wall. The plaza was filled, not with tourists, but with us. A sea of black coats and white prayer shawls, men rocking back and forth in fervent prayer, their whispers rising like a column of smoke toward the immense floodlit stones. Women stood at their section, hands pressed against the cool, ancient surface, tears tracing paths on their faces. There were soldiers in uniform, their rifles slung over their shoulders, their lips moving silently. There were teenagers in jeans, their eyes closed, lost in a focus that seemed utterly alien to their generation. In their faces I saw no fear. I saw concern, yes. Gravity, absolutely. But beneath it all, there was a bedrock of certainty. An unbreakable conviction that I, with all my academic knowledge, could not grasp. They weren't just hoping for the best. They weren't just putting on a brave face. They were standing on a promise. They were holding God to his word. And in that moment, my lifetime of intellectual detachment felt hollow, a fragile shelter against a storm they were weathering with a faith carved from granite. I returned to my study. The image of their faces burned into my mind. I ignored my laptop with its endless cycle of news. Instead, I pulled a heavy, leather-bound Tanakh from the shelf my grandfather's. The pages were soft as cloth. The Hebrew letters faded but clear. I didn't open it as a historian looking for source material. I opened it as a man adrift, searching for an anchor. Genesis, Bereshit, in the beginning. And there he was, Abram, not a king, not a warrior, not a philosopher, a nomad from Ur of the Chaldees, a city steeped in the worship of a moon god. And into this man's ordinary existence, an extraordinary voice speaks. A voice that makes a promise that is, by any rational measure, insane. Go from your country, your people and your father's household to the land I will show you. Leave everything, your security, your identity, your past. For what? For a promise. A threefold promise that would become the axis on which Jewish history would turn. First, the land. A specific geographical place. Not a spiritual metaphor, but soil and rock and river. From the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates. A promise of a home for a people who would be defined by their wandering. Second, the seed, a descendants. I will make you into a great nation. A promise made to an old man with a barren wife. A promise that would later be expanded to a people as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. A promise of survival against impossible odds. And third, the blessing. This was the part that always struck me as the most audacious. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. The destiny of this one small family was to be tied to the destiny of the entire world. Their story was to be the stage for a universal redemption. For years I had read this as a brilliant piece of mythological storytelling. But standing here today, with the threat from Iran, a modern incarnation of ancient Persia looming over us, the words feel different. They feel alive. How could this ancient pledge, made to a single man in the Bronze Age, possibly be relevant now? How could it have survived the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the diasporas, the pogroms, the Holocaust, and now face the specter of nuclear-capable missiles? The answer, I am beginning to suspect, lies in an event a few chapters later, in Genesis 15. Abram, filled with doubt, asks for a sign. God instructs him to prepare a sacrifice, a heifer, a goat, a ram, a dove, and a pigeon, all cut in two and arranged in 2 rows. This was the ancient ritual for sealing a covenant, a suzerain vassal treaty. Both parties would walk between the pieces, effectively saying, "If I break this oath, may what was done to these animals be done to me." But as darkness fell, a deep, terrifying sleep overcame Abram. He was a spectator, a witness. He saw a smoking firepot and a blazing torch, a physical manifestation of God's presence pass between the pieces, alone. Abram never took that walk. His descendants never took that walk. God took the oath upon himself. This was not a contract between equals. It was a divine decree, a one-sided, unconditional guarantee, a promise sealed not in the merit of the people, but in the very character of the God who made it. It was a promise that did not depend on Israel's faithfulness, but solely on his. And as the sirens test our resolve today, it is that ancient, one-sided promise that I must now understand, or dismiss as the grandest fiction ever told. The foundation is laid, but the structure, the kingdom, was yet to come. And that story, I know, begins with a shepherd boy who would become a king. The hum is what gets to you. Not the roar of a fighter jet, but the persistent high-frequency hum of a surveillance drone. I can't see it, but I know it's up there. A sleepless electronic eye hanging in the stratosphere, tracing patterns above a city that has been watched over for millennia. It's a modern testament to power, to the authority of a state determined to protect its throne. And it forces my mind away from the ancient shepherd Abram to another shepherdon who became a king. A king who was also given a promise of a throne, an eternal one. My grandfather's Tanakh is still open on my desk. I turn the delicate pages, my fingers tracing the lineage from Abraham, through Isaac and Jacob, past the bondage in Egypt and the conquest of Canaan, until I arrive at the story of David. David. Even to a secular historian, he is an irresistible figure, a man of shattering contradictions. He is the poet king, the sweet psalmist of Israel, a man whose heart could break before God in verses that still give voice to our deepest longings and sorrows. He is also David the warlord, the ruthless politician, the adulterer, the murderer, a man who could write a psalm of exquisite tenderness in the morning and plot the death of a loyal soldier in the afternoon to cover his own sin. How could God anchor his eternal plans to a man so brilliant and so broken? This is the paradox that has always fascinated me. And that is precisely the point. The promise was never anchored to David's perfection. It was anchored to God's fidelity. I turn to the passage in 2 Samuel chapter 7. By now David is at the zenith of his power. The Ark of the Covenant, the very symbol of God's presence, is in Jerusalem. The Philistines have been subdued. The kingdom is secure, at peace. David is living in a magnificent palace of cedar, a symbol of his success and stability. And one day, a sense of pious unease settles over him. He says to the prophet Nathan, "Here I am, living in a house of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent." It is a noble sentiment, a king wanting to build a house for his God. It is logical. It is what any potentate in the ancient world would do to honor their patron deity. Nathan, the prophet, initially agrees. Whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it, for the Lord is with you. It seems like a simple open and shut case of royal piety. But that night, the word of the Lord comes to Nathan, and the message is a stunning reversal. It is one of the most profound moments in the entire biblical narrative. God's response to David is not, "Thank you, that's a wonderful idea." It is, in essence, "You think you are going to build a house for me? David, you have it all backward. I am the one who builds. I took you from the pasture, from tending sheep, and made you ruler over my people. I have been with you everywhere you have gone. I have cut off all your enemies. Have I ever once asked for a house of cedar? David, you will not build a house for me. I will build a house for you." The word for house here is a divine play on words. David meant a physical temple, a building of stone and wood. God meant a dynasty, a lineage, a living, breathing succession of authority. And then comes the promise, a covenant as unconditional and as staggering as the one given to Abraham. God says to David, "When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son." Here, God even anticipates the failure of David's heirs. He foresees their sins. He doesn't ignore the brokenness that runs through David's own heart and will run through his line. He says, "When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you." This is not a contract based on performance. It is a promise of grace. Punishment will come, consequences are real, but the covenant itself, the promise of love and an eternal throne, will not be broken. The final, earth-shaking declaration, "Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever." Forever. That is the word that stops a historian in his tracks. I deal in the debris of fallen empires. I walk on the dust of forgotten kings. The Babylonian throne, the Persian throne, the Greek, the Roman, the Ottoman. Where are they? They are footnotes in my books. They are exhibits behind museum glass. The very concept of an eternal throne on this earth is ludicrous. When Nebuchadnezzar's armies breached these very walls in 586 BC and dragged King Zedekiah away in chains, what happened to that eternal throne? When the Romans leveled the city in 70 AD, where was David's kingdom? From my window, I can see the lights of the Knesset, the seat of Israel's modern government. A symbol of resurrected sovereignty, yes. But eternal? The politicians who debate within its walls serve at the pleasure of the electorate, their power as fleeting as a news cycle. The building itself stands as a target, a symbol of the state that our enemies like Iran vow to wipe from the map. Their leaders too sit on thrones of their own, making proclamations they believe will echo through history. They are all temporary, all of them. And yet, the promise to David whispers through the ages. It survived the Babylonian exile, it survived the Roman conquest. It has survived 2 millennia of dispersion. How? Because I am starting to see the promise was never just about a political dynasty in Jerusalem. It was pointing to something, to someone else. It was a promise that would find its ultimate fulfillment in a descendant of David who would claim a different kind of kingship. A king who would be called Son of David, whose kingdom would not be of this world and whose throne could not be toppled by armies or revolutions. A kingdom whose power was not in missiles and drones, but in a love that could not be taken away. The threat from Iran is a threat to the physical nation, the fragile political successor to David's kingdom. But as I sit here, listening to the hum of that drone, I wonder if the real, enduring throne of David is something their weapons can never, ever touch. It's a promise of a kingdom that exists right now in the hearts of those who believe, a kingdom whose final, visible establishment is still to come. And this chosen people, in all their flawed history, were chosen for a purpose far greater than just governing this small contested piece of land. They were chosen to be its heralds. The sun is higher now, casting sharp, unforgiving light on the stone buildings of the city. The pale gold of dawn has given way to a brilliant, almost aggressive, white. It's a light that exposes every crack, every imperfection. And my thoughts, still swirling around the grandeur of God's promises, are now forced to confront a brutal and uncomfortable reality. The people to whom these promises were made. My people. If Israel was chosen, why does our history read like a catalogue of failures? If we were selected for a divine purpose, why are our sacred texts filled with such honest and unflattering portraits of our own disobedience? The golden calf at the foot of Sinai, the endless grumbling in the desert, the cycles of apostasy in the book of Judges, where the people served God for a generation, only to fall into the worship of Baals and Asherahs, triggering foreign oppression until they cried out in desperation once more. It's a nauseating, repeating pattern. The prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, their words are not gentle encouragements, they are thunderous indictments, roaring condemnations of a people who took God's grace and trampled it underfoot. This is the argument I have heard 1,000 times, from critics and even within the quiet corridors of my own academic world. The concept of being chosen seems to fly in the face of the evidence. It sounds like arrogance. It sounds like a claim of ethnic superiority. And looking at the world today, at the bitter conflicts and political divisions, it is a claim that seems almost obscene. I get up from my desk and walk to the bookshelf, my fingers brushing past volumes on the Maccabean Revolt and the archaeology of the Second Temple period. I pull out a worn copy of Deuteronomy, Devarim, the words. This is Moses' final address to the people delivered on the plains of Moab just before they were to enter the Promised Land. If ever there was a moment for a glorious, morale-boosting speech about their inherent greatness, this was it. But that is not what Moses says. His words are a splash of ice-cold water. I find the passage, chapter 7. The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your ancestors that he brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the land of slavery. There it is, the reason for the choosing, laid bare. It wasn't about merit. It wasn't about numbers, strength, wisdom, or righteousness. In fact, just 2 chapters later, Moses doubles down on this point, stripping away any possible foundation for national pride. Understand then that it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. A stiff-necked people, that's what we were called. Stubborn, rebellious, prone to wander. And this description, I have to admit, resonates through our entire history. We were not chosen because we were better. We were chosen because we were loved. We were chosen because of a promise God made to our forefathers, a promise he intended to keep, regardless of the flawed character of the vessel he had chosen. This fundamentally changes the meaning of chosen. It's not a title of privilege, but a mantle of purpose, a burden. I think of the prophet Amos, a simple shepherd from Tekoa, delivering a devastating message from God to the northern kingdom of Israel at the height of its prosperity. You only have I chosen of all the families of the earth, therefore I will punish you for all your sins. The logic is inverted. Being chosen didn't mean immunity from judgment. It meant a higher standard. It meant that their actions, their sins, were more grievous because they, of all people, should have known better. They had the law, they had the prophets, they had seen the miracles. Their rebellion was not born of ignorance, but of willful defiance. Their chosenness made them more, not less, accountable. And what was the purpose? What was this burden for? The answer is woven throughout the Torah. Exodus 19:6, at the very foot of Mount Sinai, You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. A priest is a mediator, a bridge, someone who stands between a holy God and a sinful world. Israel's mission was not to hoard their chosen status for themselves. It was to be a living demonstration project for the rest of humanity. They were to be the custodians of the revelation of the one true God in a world drowning in polytheism and idolatry. Their society, their laws, their worship were meant to be a beacon, a shining city on a hill that would make other nations pause and ask, what God is like their God? And most critically, they were chosen to be the human channel through which the ultimate blessing promised to Abraham would come, the blessing for all nations, the Messiah. That was the ultimate purpose of the land, the lineage, the law, to create a specific time, place, and people for the entry of the Redeemer into the world. A notification buzzes on my phone. It's a message from my colleague, Dr. Al-Farik, a Palestinian historian at Persia University. We maintain a fragile professional friendship across the political chasm. His message is simple. Are you safe, Eli? The rhetoric is escalating. His question cuts through my theological musings. He sees the chosen people narrative as the root of the problem, the ideological justification for occupation and dispossession. And from his perspective, he has a point. The doctrine has been twisted and abused for political ends, used as a cudgel rather than a call to service. But as I sit here, staring at Moses' words, I realize the true biblical meaning is the opposite of arrogance. To be truly chosen is to be humbled. It is to acknowledge that your existence as a people is a miracle of unmerited grace. It is to accept a mission that is far larger than your own national interests. It is to be the vessel, not the treasure itself. The threat from Iran, in its modern context, is a political and military one. But in the grand sweep of this story, it is just another empire, another power that stands in opposition to this tiny, stiff-necked people. And the question remains, has the purpose of this people been fulfilled? If the Messiah has come, as my Christian friends believe, then what is the purpose of Israel now? Has the kingdom of priests been decommissioned? Or is there another chapter yet to be written in this story of God's baffling, persistent love for his chosen, stubborn people? The answer, I feel, must lie in the schism that happened 2,000 years ago with the arrival of the most famous Jew who ever lived. My correspondence with Dr. Al-Farik leaves a bitter taste in my mouth, the familiar tang of insolvable arguments. It forces me to confront the central seismic event that split my people and in many ways redefined the question of chosenness for the entire world, the life and death of Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua. For most of my life as a Jewish historian, I treated him as a historical figure, and a fascinating one at that. A first-century apocalyptic prophet, a charismatic Galilean rabbi who ran afoul of both the Jewish priestly establishment and the Roman authorities. His followers, a small sect of Messianic Jews, eventually broke away and, through a series of theological and sociological miracles, grew into a global religion that would ironically become the source of so much suffering for the very people from whom their Savior sprang. But to grapple with the theology, with the claims made about him, is another matter entirely. It requires stepping into a different framework, one that many of my people view as a betrayal. It is the framework that leads to the most divisive doctrine in the history of Jewish-Christian relations: supersessionism, replacement theology. The idea is, on the surface, compellingly logical. God made a covenant with Israel. Israel, by and large, rejected and crucified God's own Son, the Messiah. Therefore, the covenant is broken. The promises are null and void. God has cast off his unfaithful people and has created a new Israel, the Church, composed of believers from every nation. The Church has now superseded, or replaced, national Israel as the recipient of the covenant promises. The land promise becomes a spiritual metaphor for heaven. The lineage promise becomes a spiritual family of believers. The blessing is now funneled exclusively through the Church. This theology has been a catastrophe for the Jewish people. For centuries, it provided the theological justification for Christian anti-Semitism. It painted us as a rejected, cursed people, doomed to wander the earth without a home as punishment for deicide. From the sermons of John Chrysostom to the policies of the Inquisition, this doctrine had blood on its hands. It's a theology that makes the existence of the modern state of Israel a theological embarrassment, an anomaly that shouldn't exist. My phone rings. It's my sister Sarah calling from her home in a settlement in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, as she would insist. Her voice is tight with a mixture of faith and defiance. "Eli, are you watching? They are burning our flags in Tehran. They chant death to Israel. But do not be afraid. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob does not sleep. He is pruning the vine, that's all." Her words, meant to be comforting, highlight the very chasm I am contemplating. For her, our physical presence on this land is the ultimate proof of the promise. For those who hold to replacement theology, it's a political accident at best. Driven by this dissonance, I turn away from the Tanakh and to the forbidden texts of my youth, the writings of the New Testament. I pull a heavily bookmarked academic copy from a lower shelf, feeling a slight, almost superstitious tremor in my hands. I open it to the letter that confronts this question head-on. Paul's epistle to the Romans. I know the author, Saul of Tarsus, a Pharisee, a student of the great Gamaliel, a man steeped in the Torah, more Jewish in his training than I could ever be. A man who initially saw the followers of Yeshua as heretics and blasphemers and persecuted them with murderous zeal. And then something happened to him on the road to Damascus. His entire worldview was shattered and reassembled. I navigate to the core of his argument. Chapters 9, 10, and 11. These are dense, difficult passages, but today I read them not as a historian dissecting a first-century text, but as a man searching for an answer to Sarah's certainty and Dr. Al-Fariq's accusation. Paul begins with an expression of profound anguish over his own people's unbelief. "I have great sorrow and unceasing anguish in my heart," he writes, "for I could wish that I myself were cursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my people." This is not the gloating of a victor. This is the cry of a heartbroken brother. He tackles the question directly. Did God reject his people? And his answer is explosive, an unequivocal thunderclap that should have silenced 2,000 years of supersessionist thought. "By no means," he exclaims. Diage noito, the strongest possible negative in the Greek language. Never, absolutely not. He offers himself as proof. "I am an Israelite myself, a descendant of Abraham, from the tribe of Benjamin." God did not reject his people, whom he foreknew. What follows is his famous and beautiful analogy of the olive tree. It is a masterpiece of theological reasoning. He paints a picture of a cultivated olive tree. This tree, he says, is Israel. Its roots are the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the covenants God made with them. The roots are holy, and they are what support the entire tree and provide its life. Some of the natural branches, the Jews who did not believe in Yeshua, have been broken off due to their unbelief. Then he describes the Gentiles, the non-Jews who have come to faith. They are branches from a wild olive tree, and through a miracle of divine horticulture, these wild branches have been grafted into the cultivated tree. They do not replace the tree. They do not become the new root system. They are supported by the original roots. They now share in the nourishing sap that flows from the promises made to Abraham. His warning to these grafted-in non-Jewish believers is stern. "Do not consider yourselves to be superior to those other branches," he cautions. "You do not support the root, but the root supports you. Do not be arrogant, but tremble." It is a stunning rebuke to the very idea of replacement theology. The church has not replaced Israel. It has been joined to Israel. It is a partner in the covenant blessings, a recipient of a mercy it did not earn, sustained by a promise it did not originate. And then comes the final, prophetic twist. Paul insists that the breaking off of the natural branches is not permanent. It is partial, and it is temporary. He speaks of a mystery. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in, and in this way all Israel will be saved. All Israel will be saved. The promise remains. The covenant holds. God's plan for his chosen people is not finished. Their current state of unbelief is a temporary phase in a divine strategy so vast that it incorporates even their rejection to extend mercy to the entire world. But the story will circle back. The natural branches, he implies, will one day be grafted back into their own olive tree. I lean back in my chair, the book open on my lap. The sun is now high in the sky, the city fully awake. The drone is gone, replaced by the distant sounds of traffic and life. Paul's analogy is not just theology, it is a vision of history. A history where my people's stubbornness, our stiff neck, was somehow used by God as the very mechanism to open the door for the nations. But that door never closed on us. According to Paul, God is holding it open, waiting for a day of national turning, a day of restoration. It's a thought so radical, so full of hope, that it feels as dangerous as it is beautiful. And it makes me look at the threat from Iran not just as a geopolitical crisis, but as a test of the faithfulness of the God who promised to one day graft his people back in. The afternoon heat settles over Jerusalem, a heavy blanket that seems to slow time itself. The news cycle, however, does not slow. A senior Iranian official appears on state television, his face a mask of stern piety, speaking in front of a massive banner depicting missiles arching over a burning Star of David. He speaks of the cancerous Zionist entity and vows that the resistance axis will see its final victory. The words are familiar, a litany of hate I have heard my entire life. But today, filtered through my morning's exploration of covenants and prophecies, they land differently. They are no longer just political threats. They feel like a direct challenge to the very promises I've been reading. This ancient Persian animosity, how does it fit into this grand narrative? Is it just another random geopolitical conflict, or is there a deeper spiritual dimension to this enmity? The question pushes me back to the Tanakh, to the prophets who spoke not just to their own time but to a distant future. I find myself turning to the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel, the priest who became a prophet in exile. A man who saw visions that were terrifying and sublime, visions of wheels within wheels and celestial beings. He was a man who knew what it was to lose everything. He was carried off to Babylon with his people, forced to live by the Chebar River, a refugee watching his beloved city, Jerusalem, be destroyed from afar. His entire ministry was to a broken, hopeless people, a nation that was, for all intents and purposes, dead. And it is to this prophet of the dead that God gives the most powerful vision of national resurrection in all of Scripture. Chapter 37, The Valley of Dry Bones. I can almost feel the dust of that valley as I read. God's Spirit sets Ezekiel down in the middle of a valley floor littered with bones. Not just a few skeletons, but a vast multitude. They are very dry, the text emphasizes, meaning they have been there for a long time. All hope of life is gone. This is a graveyard of a nation. God asks him a question that hangs in the desolate air. Son of man, can these bones live? Ezekiel's answer is one of profound, honest humility. Sovereign Lord, you alone know. He doesn't offer a theological opinion or a political analysis. He simply defers to the one being in the universe for whom resurrection is possible. Then comes the divine command, a command that must have sounded like madness to the prophet. Prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. He is ordered to speak life into death, to preach a sermon to a cemetery. He obeys. And as he speaks, a sound begins, a rattling. Bone finds its bone. Skeleton reassembles, a macabre and miraculous construction. Then tendons and flesh appear on them, and skin covers them. An army of bodies now lies on the valley floor, but they are lifeless. There is no breath in them. God gives a second command. Prophesy to the breath. Come, breath from the four winds, and breathe into these slain that they may live. Ezekiel obeys again, and the breath of God, the Ruach, the same word for spirit used in Genesis when God breathed life into Adamantus, the bodies. They come to life, and they stand on their feet, a vast army. Then God explains the vision. "Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up and our hope is gone, we are cut off." God identifies with their despair, and then he makes a promise that echoes across 25 centuries. "I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord." For centuries, this was read by many as a beautiful metaphor for a future spiritual revival. But as I sit here in my study, in a rebuilt Jerusalem, the capital of a sovereign Jewish state that was declared into existence in 1948, the prophecy feels chillingly literal. What was the Jewish people for 1,900 years? We were a valley of dry bones, scattered across the nations, from the ghettos of Europe to the mellahs of North Africa. Our national hope was gone. Our sovereignty was a distant memory. We were, in the words of the vision, cut off. The Holocaust was the final horrific proof of our powerlessness, the moment the bones seemed destined to turn to ash forever. And then, the rattling sound, the Zionist movement, the desperate flight from persecution, the secret meetings, the political maneuvering, the wars fought with second-hand rifles. A nation of skeletons began to reassemble. The Balfour Declaration, the UN partition plan, bone finding its bone. And on May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. A body was formed. Flesh and skin covered the bones. We had a government, an army, a flag. We were a nation again. But was there breath? Was there the Spirit of God? This is the question that divides us now. For my sister Sarah, the answer is a resounding yes. The very existence of the state is the miracle, the breath of God made manifest. For many secular Israelis, the breath is the spirit of Israeli ingenuity, of military might, of a fierce, self-reliant will to survive. I look out my window again, towards the old city walls. The vision in Ezekiel is a two-stage resurrection. First, the physical restoration, the bodies. Second, the spiritual restoration, the breath of God. It seems to me as a historian that we are living somewhere between those two stages. The body has been miraculously reassembled. The bones have come together from the four corners of the earth. We are here, in our land, just as the prophet foretold. But the true, deep spiritual revival, the moment when the nation as a whole recognizes the God who brought them back, that part of the prophecy feels like it is still waiting to be fulfilled. The threat from Iran in this light is a threat against the reassembled body. It is an attempt by a modern enemy to scatter the bones once more, to reverse the miracle before the second stage, the spiritual quickening, can fully take place. It is a battle not just over territory, but over a prophecy in progress. It is a confrontation aimed at the heart of Ezekiel's vision, an attempt to prove that these bones can, in fact, be killed again. But the prophecy ends with an absolute statement of divine sovereignty. "Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it." The final outcome is not in doubt, even if the path to it is through the fire of conflict. The God who brought a nation out of a graveyard, it seems, has a vested interest in protecting his work. A new alert flashes across my screen, this one not from a news agency, but from the IDF Home Front Command. It's a test of the National Alert System, a jarring digital siren sent to every phone in the country. A drill, but the cortisol spike is real. For a few seconds, my heart hammers against my ribs, and the quiet of my study feels thin and brittle. It's a reminder that the enemy is not an abstraction. The rhetoric of annihilation from Tehran is backed by a very real and sophisticated arsenal. They are the visible threat, the declared enemy on the map. But as I delve deeper into this labyrinth of prophecy and history, I'm beginning to sense that the conflict with Iran is a symptom of a much older, deeper antagonism. The players change: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Rome, the Third Reich, and now the Islamic Republic of Iran. But the animosity towards Israel remains a strange and persistent constant in history. It seems at times to defy rational political explanation. Why this obsessive focus on a tiny sliver of land and its handful of people? This question pushes me into the more esoteric corners of the biblical narrative, into the language of spiritual warfare. It's a concept that my academic training taught me to dismiss as pre-modern superstition. And yet, the sheer, irrational endurance of this conflict forces me to consider it. I think back to the original promise to Abraham in Genesis 12. Tucked inside the blessing is its dark twin. Whoever curses you, I will curse. This implies an ongoing cosmic struggle. From the very beginning, the people chosen to be the vehicle of God's blessing to the world would also become the target of a profound curse, a spiritual enmity. Where does this enmity come from? The prophets give hints. The book of Daniel speaks of spiritual princes behind earthly kingdoms, the prince of Persia, the prince of Greece, celestial beings influencing the course of nations. It's a worldview in which human history is the visible manifestation of an unseen war. And then there's Ezekiel again. Just after the promise of restoration in chapter 37, chapters 38 and 39 describe a great future invasion of the restored land of Israel. It is a terrifying prophecy of a massive coalition of nations led by a figure named Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. For years, biblical scholars and eschatologists have debated the modern identities of these ancient names. And one name that appears consistently in this coalition is Persia, Iran. According to Ezekiel, this invasion will happen after Israel has been gathered from the nations and is living in unwalled villages in a state of perceived security. The motive of the invaders is pure plunder and destruction. They look at the restored nation of Israel and say, "I will advance against a land of unwalled villages, to loot and carry off plunder, and to turn my hand against the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods." But the prophecy reveals a deeper, divine purpose behind this human aggression. God says to Gog, "I am against you." He declares that he himself will lure this coalition into invading Israel. Why? For a terrifying and magnificent reason: to reveal his own holiness and power to the world. God says, "I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me, when I am proved holy through you, O Gog, before their eyes." This is a staggering thought. God will use the very evil and hatred of Israel's enemies as the backdrop against which he will perform a final, undeniable act of salvation. The conflict is not just about Israel's survival, it is about God's reputation, his name, his glory among all nations. The prophecy describes a supernatural destruction of the invading armies. An earthquake, infighting, plague, torrential rain, hailstones and burning sulfur. It is a divine intervention on a scale not seen since the Exodus. The outcome is not military victory for Israel, but divine vindication for God. The climax of the prophecy is the repeated refrain, "Then they will know that I am the Lord, the nations will know, and Israel will know. The world will be forced to reckon with the God of Israel." I lean back, the weight of these chapters pressing down on me. Is this what we are seeing the beginnings of? Is the current posturing and threatening from Iran a prelude, the slow gathering of the storm clouds Ezekiel saw? I don't know. I am a historian, not a prophet. To claim to know the exact timing and identification of these events is the height of arrogance. But I can see a pattern: the persistent, seemingly irrational hatred, the coalition of powers aligning against this one small state, the global stage upon which this drama is unfolding. The conflict with Iran, then, is more than a geopolitical struggle over regional dominance or nuclear ambitions. Seen through this lens, it is one of the final acts in a drama that began in the Garden of Eden. It is the visible manifestation of the curse fighting against the blessing. The Iranian regime, whether they know it or not, may simply be playing a role assigned to them in a script written long ago. They see themselves as agents of history, fulfilling a religious and political destiny. But Ezekiel's prophecy suggests they are pawns in a much larger game, instruments to be used by the very God they deny, for a purpose they cannot comprehend. My phone vibrates again. It's not an alert this time, but a picture from my daughter Tamar, who is studying art in Florence. It's a photo of Michelangelo's David, a perfect marble body, poised and confident before his battle. She has captioned it, "Thinking of you, Abba, remember who we are." I stare at the image of the young shepherd king facing his own giant. David's enemy was a physical giant, a champion of flesh and blood. Our enemy today is a nation-state with missiles and proxies. But if Daniel and Ezekiel are right, the true enemy is unseen, a spiritual principality, a deep-seated enmity that has haunted my people for generations. And if that is true, then our defense cannot solely be in our own military might, our Iron Dome or our F-35S. The ultimate defense must be in the promise of the God who declared, "I am against you, O Gog," the God who vows to use the very hatred of our enemies to make his own name known. The photograph of Michelangelo's David stays on my screen. Tamar's message, "Remember who we are," was meant to be an encouragement, a call to strength and heritage. But as the evening light softens the edges of Jerusalem, her words stir a different, more unsettling question within me. Who are we? We are the people of the covenant, the nation of the prophets, the lineage of kings. But we are also the stiff-necked people, the builders of the golden calf, the nation that demanded a king so we could be like all the others. We are David the poet, and we are David the murderer. We are the survivors of the Holocaust, and we are the subjects of bitter political controversy. We are a paradox. My day-long journey through the scriptures has been a dizzying pendulum swing between divine promise and human failure. The unconditional covenants with Abraham and David are like granite foundations, but the history built upon them is a structure full of cracks, rebellion, and ruin. God's faithfulness is perfect, but ours is tragically flawed. And this leads me back to the thorniest part of the puzzle, the part I have always intellectually sidestepped, back to Paul, back to Romans. I know the central argument of Christianity rests on this very point, the utter inadequacy of human righteousness. I have always respected it as a theological concept for others, but I never applied its stark diagnosis to myself or my people collectively. We had the Torah, we had the law, the traditions, the rituals. Weren't these our path to God? But Paul the Pharisee argues that the law's true purpose was not to be a ladder we could climb to God, but a mirror to show us how dirty our faces were. It was meant to show us our need for a savior, to prove that we could never, ever be righteous enough on our own. I turn the pages of Romans again, my eyes scanning the verses that form what Christians call the Romans road to salvation. I read them now not as a historian analyzing a text, but as a man alone in his study, with the threats of a hostile world pressing in and the weight of his own people's history on his shoulders. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Romans 3:23. All. Not just the Gentiles, the pagans, the Romans. All. That includes the chosen people. It includes me. The words are a universal leveler. Before a holy God, all our claims to righteousness, our heritage, our religious observances fall short. The glory of God is the standard, and no one meets it. For the wages of sin is death. Romans 6:23a. Death, separation from God, the ultimate consequence. This is not just a physical end, but a spiritual one. It's the state of the dry bones in Ezekiel's valley before the breath of God arrived. It's the silence that follows when a nation is cut off from its life source. And then, the second half of that verse, the part that changes everything. But the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. Romans 6:23b.ob. A gift, not a wage, not something earned or deserved, something freely given. This is the logic of the unconditional covenants, the logic of grace distilled into a single personal offer, and it is tied inextricably to the person of Yeshua. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Romans 5:8. This verse stops me. It reframes the crucifixion. For most of my life, I saw the cross as a symbol of Christian persecution of Jews, a symbol of failure, of a dead Messiah. But Paul presents it as the ultimate expression of God's love, not a reaction to our goodness, but an action taken in the midst of our sinfulness. He argues that this was the moment the covenants found their ultimate fulfillment. This was the blessing to all nations promised to Abraham. This was the descendant of David whose kingdom would have no end. This was God himself, in the person of his Son, walking between the pieces of the covenant sacrifice, taking the curse of breaking it upon himself so that we, the promise breakers, could receive the blessing. My mind reels. It's too much. It turns my entire understanding of my identity on its head. I have always defined myself by my heritage, my people, my connection to this land and its history. But this message says that my ultimate identity is not found in being a son of Abraham by blood, but in being a child of God by faith. Suddenly, I think of Iran again. Not of their leaders or their missiles, but of the ordinary people. The students in Tehran, the shopkeepers in Isfahan, the families living under a regime of oppression. According to this Romans road, they are in the same spiritual state as me. They too have sinned. They too fall short. And for them too, the gift of God is offered. The promise to Abraham all peoples on earth will be blessed through you was never about creating an exclusive club. It was about creating a channel. Israel was chosen to be the people who would bring the Messiah into the world, but the Messiah came for the world, including our enemies. The thought is both profoundly humbling and gloriously liberating. It means the ultimate solution to the conflict with Iran is not a military victory or a political treaty. The ultimate solution is a change of heart, a turning by both Jews and Iranians to the God who offers a free gift of grace. A tear escapes my eye and falls onto the page, smudging the ink of Romans 10:9. If you declare with your mouth, Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. It is so simple, too simple, my academic mind protests. But my heart, weary from the weight of history and the fear of the future, feels a strange peace. It's the logic of the olive tree again. The invitation is not to abandon my Jewish identity, but to see it fulfilled. It is an invitation to be grafted back into my own tree, to find my place in the story not just as a historian observing it from the outside, but as a participant who has finally understood the point of it all. The point was never our own righteousness, it was always his. The first call to prayer from the minarets on the Temple Mount begins to echo across the Kidron Valley. It's a sound as integral to the soundscape of Jerusalem as the Sabbath siren or the peal of church bells. For most of my life, it was just part of the background noise. Tonight, I hear it differently. I hear it as the sound of a world searching for God, a world full of people made in his image, following the paths they believe lead to him. My heart, still reeling from the personal revelation of the Romans road, is filled not with antagonism, but with a strange and aching compassion. I get up and walk to my window, looking out over the ancient city, now a tapestry of twinkling lights under a sky full of stars, Abraham's stars. The geopolitical questions that started this long night's journey now seem smaller, framed by a much larger, eternal reality. Why is Israel still God's chosen people? The answer is clearer to me now than it has ever been. We are still the chosen people because God's promises are irrevocable. His covenants with Abraham and David were unilateral and unconditional. They were based on his character, not ours. He swore an oath to himself, and God does not break his word. He did not choose us because we were worthy, and he does not abandon us because we are unworthy. He chose us for a purpose, and that purpose is not yet complete. We were chosen to be the custodians of his oracles, the people who would write down his law and his prophecies. We were chosen to be the lineage through which the Messiah, the blessing for all nations, would enter human history. And, as Paul so shockingly revealed, we were even chosen in our temporary, partial hardening to be the mechanism by which salvation would spread to the Gentile world. And according to the prophets, we are chosen for a final act. We are chosen to be the people who will be miraculously preserved through the fires of the end times, brought back to this land as a prelude to a national day of repentance and recognition when we will look upon the one we have pierced and mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, as the prophet Zechariah foretold. Our continued existence as a people, and our presence in this land, is the living proof that God is faithful to his word, and that his overarching plan for history is still on track. What then of the unchanging promise of the Bible amidst the conflict with Iran? The promise is that Israel will be preserved, not because our army is invincible or our intelligence is infallible, but because God has tied his own name and reputation to our survival. The threats from Iran, seen through the lens of Ezekiel 38, are not a random political event, but a prophesied confrontation that God himself will use to demonstrate his sovereignty to the world. The ultimate security of Israel does not rest in the Knesset or at IDF headquarters, but in the unchanging character of the God who declared, "I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me." This does not mean there will be no suffering. It does not mean there will be no war or loss. The rod of correction, the punishment for sin, is also part of the promise. But annihilation, erasure from the map, the covenants stand as an absolute divine veto against that possibility. The promise is that a remnant will always survive, that the lineage will continue, and that the nation will exist to see the consummation of God's plan. I look at my phone. The news alerts are still there. The threats are still real. The world is still a dangerous and broken place. But my fear has been replaced by a profound sense of awe. My life as a historian has been about studying the past. But tonight, I feel as though I have been given a glimpse of the future, not the specific headlines of tomorrow, but the final, guaranteed outcome of the story. The story is not about the triumph of a political state. It is about the faithfulness of a covenant-keeping God. It is not about the superiority of one people over another. It is about a God who chose one broken family to bring a blessing to all families. The ultimate promise is not just the preservation of a nation, but the offer of redemption to every single person on the planet, Jew and Gentile, Israeli and Iranian, through the Jewish Messiah, Yeshua. My no-face channel, my little historical project, suddenly feels entirely inadequate. I had planned to speak about pottery shards and ancient trade routes, but now I have a different story to tell. A story that is far more personal and far more explosive. It is the story of a historian who sifted through the evidence and found not a myth, but a promise. A promise that is still unfolding in the headlines of today. A promise that offers a hope that is stronger than the threat of war. A hope rooted in the unchanging love of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I pick up my microphone. The city is quiet now. The great drama of God and his people sleeps, for a few hours at least. I take a deep breath, the air cool and filled with the scent of pine and ancient stone. I press record. Why is Israel still God's chosen people? I begin, my voice steady, filled with a conviction I did not possess 12 hours ago. What is the unchanging promise of the Bible amidst the escalating conflict with Iran? These are not academic questions for me, not anymore.